The Velorian diplomatic vessel Serenity of Worlds had traveled 600 light-years for this moment. Ambassador Kael'dris stood at the observation deck, watching the blue-green world rotate slowly below, and felt something his species had not felt in over 1,000 years of interstellar diplomacy. Nervousness, not fear. The Velorians had encountered 31 spacefaring civilizations across their centuries of expansion. They had protocols for aggression, for religious zealotry, for species so alien in their cognition that communication required entirely new mathematical frameworks. They had seen civilizations that communicated through bioluminescence, through gravitational pulses, through the deliberate manipulation of quantum states. They had never encountered anything quite like humans. The preliminary observation probes had been running for 60 years before the Conclave authorized first contact. 60 years of watching. 60 years of data, analysis, and, though the official reports never used the word confusion, Ambassador. His aide, a young Velorian named SIV, appeared at his elbow. The surface delegation is ready. They're calling at Geneva, a city of historical significance to them. They use it for negotiations. Appropriate, Kael'dris said. He straightened his diplomatic sash, a gesture inherited from his species' earliest traditions. How are the translation matrices? Fully calibrated. Their primary diplomatic language is English. We've had 60 years of immersion data. SIV paused. Ambassador, the briefing analyst flagged something in the latest observation summary. They flag something every morning. This is different. SIV hesitated in the way that junior officials hesitate when they're about to say something that sounds insane. The humans have been aware of our observation probes for approximately 11 years. The observation deck felt very quiet. 11 years, Kael'dris repeated. Yes, sir. They detected them using radio telescopes in 2031. They've been, another hesitation, pretending not to notice. While simultaneously upgrading their detection networks, mapping our probe positions, and apparently running what their military calls a contingency planning exercise that has been ongoing for a decade. Kael'dris turned slowly from the window. They knew we were watching them. For 11 years. And they said nothing. No, sir. SIV's expression carried that particular mix of professional composure and personal bewilderment that had become familiar during this assignment. They just watched us watching them. And waited. The ambassador looked back at the blue-green world below. SIV, he said quietly, update the behavioral profile. Category 7, Advanced Strategic Cognition with Deliberate Information Concealment. That's the category we use for civilizations that have survived at least one major existential conflict. Yes, Kael'dris said. I know. The Geneva summit was everything the observation probes had suggested and nothing the Velorian diplomatic corps had prepared for. The humans were physically remarkable in ways the physiological reports had documented, but somehow failed to convey. They were large, not by alien standards. Many species dwarfed them, but there was a density to them, a solidity that their size didn't fully explain. They moved with a kind of casual physical confidence, comfortable in their own bodies in a way that Velorians, with their more delicate bone structure and hypersensitive nervous systems, found subtly unsettling. But what Kael'dris noticed most was their faces. Velorian faces were expressive by the standards of most species: broad brow ridges, mobile lip structures, a range of approximately 40 distinguishable expressions mapped by their xenosociologists across millennia of interspecies contact. Human faces, he realized within the first 3 minutes of the summit, were something else entirely. They communicated constantly, not just when speaking. Every pause, every shift in posture, every micro-movement of the facial musculature carried information. The lead human diplomat, a woman called Secretary General Mara Osei, was conducting 2 conversations simultaneously. The words she spoke, and something else entirely, conducted in the language of her face, directed at her colleagues, read and responded to so naturally that none of them seemed conscious of doing it. They were beautiful in an unsettling way, like watching something that had evolved for a world far more complex and socially demanding than any environment Kael'dris had previously encountered. Ambassador Kael'dris, Secretary General Osei said, extending her hand in the human greeting gesture his briefings had described. "Welcome to Earth. We're very glad you finally decided to say hello." Finally. The word was casual, deliberate. She had just told him, in one syllable, that she knew about the 60 years of observation, and that she had chosen this specific moment to acknowledge it. Kael'dris took her hand. It was warm and firm. He felt the strength in it, not threatening, just present. "Secretary General," he said, through the translation matrix, "the pleasure is ours. We have looked forward to this introduction for some time." She smiled. The smile reached her eyes, but her eyes also contained something older and more careful than the smile. "I imagine you have," she said. "Please sit. We prepared quite a lot to discuss." The first day went well. Too well, Kael'dris decided that evening, reviewing his notes in the Velorian embassy suite. The humans were excellent diplomats. Almost disturbingly excellent. They were warm without being transparent, forthcoming without revealing anything they hadn't chosen to reveal, curious in ways that suggested genuine interest while simultaneously mapping every answer for tactical value. They had, he noted, asked more questions than they answered. He was composing his initial field report when SIV knocked and entered, wearing the expression that now reliably preceded difficult information. "The cultural immersion team has flagged something from the secondary observation stream," SIV said. "The human media, their internal communications network, the global information system, the internet. Yes, while we've been conducting formal diplomacy here, the rest of their civilization has been." SIV consulted his data tablet, extensively discussing us. "That's expected. First contact is. They're not just discussing us, sir. They're making jokes about us." Kael'dris set down his report. "Jokes," he said. "Thousands of them. Per hour. Their humor systems appear to be processing the first contact event at extraordinary speed, and, Ambassador, some of them are quite perceptive. They've identified inconsistencies in our cover story about the probe detection timeline. They've written what appear to be satirical analyses of our diplomatic phrasing patterns. One individual with a significant public following compared your opening statement to a document format their governments use when they want to say something without actually saying anything." Kael'dris sat back. He had encountered humor among alien species before. It was common. Most sufficiently complex social species developed it. But humor about the Velorians, directed at the Velorians, disseminated across a planet in real time, while formal diplomacy was simultaneously ongoing. "Tell the cultural team to compile a report," he said. "I want to understand what they're finding funny. Specifically, because in Kael'dris's experience, what a civilization found funny told you more about them than anything they said at a diplomatic table." The report arrived the next morning and kept Kael'dris awake for most of the following night. Humans, it turned out, found everything funny, including, perhaps especially, things that were not funny at all. The cultural analysis team had identified humor patterns clustering around physical danger, existential threat, death, suffering, failure, embarrassment, social awkwardness, and the gap between expectation and reality. Humans made jokes about the worst things that happened to them. They made jokes while those things were happening. They had, across the sweep of their recorded history, made jokes in the middle of wars, famines, plagues, and genocides. Not because they didn't feel the horror of those things. The analysis made that achingly clear. The jokes coexisted with the grief and fear and anger. They didn't replace them. They were something humans apparently used to remain functional in the presence of the unbearable. It was, Kael'dris thought, one of the strangest and most remarkable psychological adaptations he had ever encountered. But it was the second section of the report that truly disturbed him. "I need to understand something," he said to Secretary General Osei on the third day. They were in a smaller meeting room now, just the two of them and their respective aides. The formal portion of the summit was proceeding well enough that both delegations had agreed to make space for what the humans called real talk. "Your history," Osei raised an eyebrow. A micro-expression he had learned meant interest mixed with caution. What about it? Your species, Kael'dris said carefully, has been at war with itself for the entirety of your recorded history. Yes, she said. He waited for elaboration. None came. You have, in the last 200 years alone, engaged in conflicts that killed hundreds of millions of your own people. Yes, you have developed weapons capable of ending all complex life on your planet, and you build enough of them to do it dozens of times over. We did. You nearly used them. Multiple times. We came quite close, she agreed. And yet, he said, and this was the part he had struggled to articulate since reading the cultural report, you are also the species that, in the middle of one of your largest wars, when soldiers on opposite sides of a conflict were trying to kill each other, stopped. On a single night, got out of their trenches, shared food, and sang songs together. And then, the next morning, went back to trying to kill each other. Osei was quiet for a moment. You've done your homework, she said. I've had 60 years of data and 3 days of very informative conversations, he said. Secretary General, I have met 31 space-faring civilizations. I have never encountered a species that contains such profound contradictions in its nature. You are simultaneously the most cooperative and the most violent, the most creative and the most destructive. You build and you burn, and sometimes you do both to the same thing. Your history is, he searched his translation matrix for the right word, terrifying. She didn't look away. Yes, she said simply. It is. You don't deny it. Why would I? It's true. He leaned forward. Then help me understand this. How does a species with your history, with that much blood on its hands from conflicts it chose, with weapons it built specifically to destroy itself, how does that species develop interstellar travel? How does that species build the diplomatic infrastructure you've shown us? How are you here, at this table, instead of a radioactive ruin? Amara Osei looked at him for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. Not the careful diplomatic voice she used at the formal table. Something older and more honest. Because we kept choosing to be, she said. Not every time. Not without catastrophic failures. Not without unforgivable things. But enough times by enough people that we're still here. Ambassador, you want to understand what humans are? We are a species that knows exactly what we're capable of. We've seen it. We've done it. We have no illusions about our nature. She paused. And we're here anyway. Building anyway. Reaching anyway. Not because we've solved the darkness in us, but because we decided it doesn't get the final word. The room was very quiet. Kael'dris thought about the Christmas truce, one night of improbable, temporary, heartbreaking peace in the middle of industrialized slaughter. He thought about the nuclear arsenals built and never fully used. He thought about 60 years of watching humans fail and rebuild and fail differently and rebuild again. That, he said slowly, is either the most hopeful thing I've ever heard or the most dangerous. Ambassador, she said, and for the first time the careful diplomatic composure cracked, just slightly. Let something genuine through, it's both. That's the whole point. It's always both. The Velorian Cultural Report, filed 6 months after the Geneva Summit, was classified for 11 years before portions were released to the public. The section that generated the most discussion among Velorian scholars was not the analysis of human military history, nor the assessment of their technological development, nor even the detailed breakdown of their neurological predisposition toward both empathy and tribalism. It was the final paragraph, written by Ambassador Kael'dris himself. In 31 first contact events across 4 centuries of Velorian exploration, we have sought civilizations that were stable, predictable, and safe. We have, by that measure, found many. But in all that time, we have not found a civilization that was genuinely, fundamentally alive in the way that humans are alive, contradictory and striving and refusing in the face of all evidence to stop believing that tomorrow could be made better than today. They're the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. They're also, I believe, the most important. They should be engaged carefully as partners. They should never be engaged as enemies. Not because we would lose, though we might, but because a humanity pointed against you has historically consumed itself in the effort and considered it an acceptable cost. A humanity pointed toward a shared horizon, However, that is something the galaxy has not yet seen. I find myself hoping it will. Secretary General Osei received a copy of that paragraph 3 years after it was written, slipped through diplomatic channels by an anonymous Velorian official. She read it in her office in Geneva, late at night, the city lights blurring softly through rain-streaked windows. Then she set it down, looked out at those lights. All those lights, all those lives, all that furious, complicated, improbable humanity burning in the dark. And for the first time in a very long career of holding herself together in difficult rooms, she let herself feel the full weight of what she was carrying. Hope and terror. Together. Always together. Both, she thought. That's always been the whole point. She wiped her eyes. She picked up her pen. She went back to work. Somewhere 600 light years away, a vessel turned toward home, and the ambassador who had come to assess a species left having been assessed himself by creatures who had stared into their own darkness for 10,000 years and chosen, imperfectly, stubbornly, gloriously, to build fires in it anyway. The stars, as always, were watching. This time, they were watching something new.